completely washed away, and they're being raised up to a brand new life. So Jesus says, baptize them. That means get them their spiritual health. Get their spiritual self taken care of. And then number 2, Jesus says, teach them to obey. That means tell them all the things that I just taught you and encourage them whatever they need so that they're actually living it out. But here's the meta principle, the principle above those 2 specific bullet points. Jesus is saying, if I've given you something, you need to give it away. So here's the little statement. Go ahead and write this one down. Those who have it, give it away. Those who have what God has given to them, those who have been blessed by something from God, give it away. This is the standard practice principle for the way Jesus calls us to live. If you look at James 1:27, on your note sheet there, it says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. This sounds very different from what Jesus just said. In James, he's giving us 2 clear commands that make for pure and holy religion. And you can read those 2 clear commands, and you could be completely secularized by this kind of idea. You could say, okay, James is telling us what we really need to do is make sure we care for the poor and not fall into the bad stuff. Don't get polluted by the world. Care for the poor and don't get polluted. If we do that, then we'll be good. And you know what? There's some agencies in this town that are doing that very thing. They're caring for the poor, and they're trying not to be morally corrupt. So, they're trying to do this very same thing. But does that mean that that's on the same page as what Jesus had just called us to do? In fact, if you were to read James closely, you would see that he's saying the same thing as Jesus. Because Jesus says, obey everything I've taught you, and one of the things he taught was, take your finances and care for the poor. That's something Jesus taught. So James is just taking that one piece out of Jesus' teaching, and he's pulling it out and he's saying, you got to do this. This is the symbol of all the rest that Jesus taught. And then James also says, keep yourself from being polluted by the world. Well, you know what? When you were born, you were polluted by the world. That's what happens. As soon as you enter this world, you are polluted. It's all over you. Pollution is in your soul. It's what the Bible calls sin. And so the only way to prevent yourself from being polluted by the world is to ask God to wash it off. And that's what the whole symbol of baptism is all about. So here we've got these 2 different angles of looking at the same thing, but I got to tell you, James says something that disturbs me. Because in Jesus' words, I just need to teach other people to obey. In James's words, I need to do it too. See, the thing is that James is trying to remind us that if I'm a disciple, I don't get off by just teaching others. I have to do it myself. I have to care for the poor. I have to look after the widows and the orphans. And you know what? I got to be honest with you. That's really difficult for me because as I look at the James passage, I see a tension where there's on one side of the equation, there's this moral purity issue. Keep yourself from being polluted by the world. And I see that as my responsibility not only to keep myself pure, but like Jesus said, as a salt shaker to the world, keeping the whole world kind of pure. I need to somehow prevent the bacteria of the sinfulness in the world from the rest of the world. And so I see this moral purity as a big issue. And then James says, but there's also this social justice part. Widows and orphans who need help, and we got to take care of them. And I'll just tell you, this is my own political point of view. Usually I don't talk politics in church, but I'll just tell you this is how it works. On this side over here, you've got, well, maybe I should flip them. Yeah, your right-hand side. So on the right, over here, you've got the people who are all about the moral purity, okay? They want to make sure that the world is doing things morally right and pure and trying to avoid the pollution that's come from irresponsible behavior. And over here on the left, you've got people who really, really want to care for the poor and the fatherless and the widows, and they're like, even if we end up doing some things that might might enable someone who's not really living a righteous life, that's okay because they're poor and we need to care for them. You see this kind of dual tension? I'm sure you've heard about this before. I won't maybe necessarily use labels and stuff, but this is the basic idea, and we all struggle with this. So now when it's coming down to me and I have to make a decision and there's a poor person in my life, what do? Do I enable them possibly and run the risk that they are going to take advantage of me? Or do I encourage them to live a responsible life and not give them any material help? You know what I'm talking about. This is a big question every time. I mean, we don't have it so much here in Lafayette, but every time you drive down the road and there's a guy standing on the corner with a sign that says, "Please help." What are you going to do in that moment? What are you going to do? Here's the problem. I think you and I believe that we have limited resources. I believe I have limited resources. And so part of my problem is I can't help every single person who asks. I have to only help a few people. So therefore, I'm going to help the people who are most qualified, people who are most worthy of the help, right? Because I need to somehow make that determination of how my resources are going to be used. Because if I help everybody, my resources are going to be depleted, and I'm not going to have any more to help the people who really need it. And so as a result, I spend so much time evaluating the situation, and I don't spend enough time actually doing the help. Last week, I talked about a guy named Steve Jobs. This is the dude, you know, he invented the iPad with probably a billion other people who worked for him and a ton of money. And I was talking about how he's got sort of he understands what growth is all about and some corporate things and how we kind of like some of the stuff he does. But what I didn't tell you is that I don't have a clue if he's ever given $1 of his to charity. On the other hand of the equation is this dude here, Bill Gates, who ordinarily I don't like, just because I don't like the Windows operating system as much. You know, I'm a techno geek. I'm opinionated with all these things, and so ordinarily I don't like Bill Gates as much. This is an old picture. There's a better one of him. If you could just go ahead. Yeah, that's a newer picture. So, you know, he's kind of, you can picture, in the old Mac versus PC commercials, they picked a guy to play the PC that kind of looked a little bit like Bill Gates, you know, with the suit and the hair and everything. That's sort of intentional. They did that because he doesn't exude an aura of cool to the world. But you know what? This dude is the second richest man in the world with a net worth of $53.3 billion. So do you know what he did? He quit his job and he started a foundation called the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And go ahead and click the next slide. Check this out. This is from 1994 to the present, how much money they have given away. For global health, they've given away